Chapter 25, Trying to Escape. Once dinner was hastily consumed, Nanny jumped her pen wall and worked on opening Mrs. Brown's door first. Nanny was nervous and it took her 3 tries, but she finally knocked the block upright and Mrs. Brown pushed out. She was free. "Okay, go to work," said Nanny in a whisper, for suddenly everything felt tense and a cloak of near silence felt necessary. "Oil them up." Mrs. Brown hastened to the tool shed where Burdock pointed out the pail he'd seen earlier. The ungainly cow turned around and backed up with Burdock calling directions. "A little bit to the right, Mrs. Brown. Turn more. Yes, there you go." She went carefully, stepping over and around the jumbled mess, and dunked the shaggy end of her tail into the bucket. Bletch! Greasy indeed. But she would set to work oiling the hinges while Nanny squeezed through Figgy's tunnel. "You think that's big enough?" asked Nanny in a low voice. "Oh dear, well, it's going to have to be. Now if I get stuck, you'd better push me." Figgy had pulled all the hay back from the escape hatch, and the dimmest of light shone through. "Here I go," said Nanny. "Wish me luck." She hadn't realized until right now how frightened she was of this whole escape. Getting through the tunnel, opening the barn doors and all the stalls, sneaking away from the farm, and, of course, not getting caught. Nanny took a deep breath. She crouched low, knelt down, and wiggled her head and front hooves into the hole. The ground was surprisingly cold and hard, like cement. This was going to be tight. She squirmed in farther, and she could see a patch of outside. A few tiny snowflakes were swirling down. The crisp air actually felt good, invigorating. She pushed with her back hooves and worked her way nearly halfway through the tunnel and managed to press in farther. Oof, it's tight. She tried to take a deep, fortifying breath, but the hole constricted her. And now that the thickest part of her was wedged in the hole, she couldn't get any traction. Her front legs stuck straight out, and her hind hooves pushed back but caught on nothing. Oh no! Was she stuck? Burdock's bristly head suddenly appeared. "Oh, Burdock, dear me," Nanny said not loudly. "I think I'm stuck." "You can't be," said Burdock. "You're almost through. Tell Figgy to push you." Nanny twisted her head slightly and whispered insistently, "Figgy, give me a shove." Figgy said something, but it was muffled, and Nanny and Burdock couldn't make it out. Had Figgy understood her? Was she just stuck here? But oh, Nanny felt a push. Inside the barn, Figgy pushed, first with her head and shoulders, then she turned and shoved with her back, digging with her hooves in the dirt. It didn't seem she was making any headway either. "Sorry," she snorted. "I can't. It's there." In a crumble of dirt and sand, Figgy collapsed back into the hole, and Nanny was propelled ungracefully through into the night. "You did it!" the pig heard Burdock exclaim from the other side. "Now around to the front." Papery moths were flying in and out of the cool luminettes above the barn doors. Weak as the light was, Burdock didn't like the nakedness of it. He wanted the dark. Nanny looked as if she felt the same. "Burdock," said Nanny in a hush, staying off to the side in the shadows, "are the doors oiled?" "I think so. Mrs. Brown did it. Let's hope it works." "Okay, good," said Nanny. "Now for this lock." Burdock watched as Nanny studied the doors and the bar that held them. He stole another glance down to the house. The kitchen light was on, but nothing else. No Dewey in sight. Smoke curled out of the chimney, a twist of gray against the black sky. "Let's do this," whispered Nanny. She tiptoed up to the doors and leaned her head forward beneath the bar until her forehead came to rest on the vertical boards. Slowly she stood up taller, hooking her horns under the bar, and tried to lift. From his position, Burdock saw the bar give. It lifted an inch, then another, and a bit more, and now Nanny stood on the tips of all four hooves, straining her head and neck and shoulders, stretching as high as she possibly could, struggling to lift the heavy oak brace free. But it wasn't enough. The bar wasn't clearing the slots. Ah, she sighed, then lowered her head, and the bar slid back into place. She ducked back into the shadows. Burdock moved closer, standing just near enough to Nanny that her coat brushed against his face. Had he never touched her hair before? It was unexpectedly soft. "What if you try running and butting the bar off?" Burdock asked. "Yes," said Nanny, studying the doors again. "I think that's the only other way. I was just worried that might make too much noise." In the cool air, her breath came out in warm puffs of white. Burdock looked quickly again at the farmhouse window and shivered, but Nanny kept her gaze on the doors. Now the goat backed up a few steps, positioned the end of the bar securely in her sights, then bounded forward and bucked up in one unbroken motion. The bar was knocked cleanly up and out of the slots, sailed through the air, and landed with a small thud in the grass off to the other side. Stunned, she turned to gape at Burdock. "Wow," he whispered. "Neat. All right, now, step back. I'll tell Mrs. Brown to push open the doors." He ran quickly back into the barn. Burdock gave the okay. Though the doors had been oiled, still he steeled himself to hear the loud, grating creak. But as Mrs. Brown nudged the wood and the doors swung out, they opened as silently as theater curtains at the start of a performance. The overhead light filtered into the barn, and all the animals leaned out of their stalls. Just like Nanny's, their eyes were bright and frightened and awed. "Okay, we have to be quick," said Nanny in a fervent whisper. "Once I get you out, go around to the side of the barn where it's dark. I'll be the last one, so when I arrive, we bolt." As Mrs. Brown had already been freed, she nodded and slipped around into the dark. Natura left her spot on the edge of Fluff's pen and went out too. Burdock remained by the door as watchman. Nanny began to open stalls. Her heart was pounding away, and she felt jittery, almost weak with nerves, and her first go at Poll's door was way off. The second one, too. "It's okay, Nanny," said Poll. "Steady on." "Right," she whispered. "Steady on." She zeroed in on the block and hit it just right, and Poll touched the boards with his hoof, and the stall door opened. The huge horse came out, looking at her squarely. "You're something, Nanny," he said, and went out the barn doors, past Burdock, to join Mrs. Brown. Tug was freed next, easy enough, with 2 tries. "Bravo," he whispered, giving Nanny a crisp nod. He tried to pick up his hooves and set them down lightly. It wasn't easy to move 2,000 pounds and make no noise. On to the other side of the aisle. Tick's door lined up on the first try. "Go," she said, giving him a nudge. "Go around the side with the others, and stay there." Then Figgy. Figgy's block was looser, and Nanny had to go back and forth, tapping a bit left, a bit right, but finally Figgy was out, trotting away, calling, "Almost there, Nanny. One more." Now Nanny came to Fluff's pen. Nanny lined up, bucked, and rammed the block squarely from the right. Such a solid chop should have had an effect, but the block didn't move, not an inch. Nanny backed up and tried again, putting more force into her assault, but though her aim was perfect, the block didn't budge. It made little sense. When was Fluff out of her pen last? Nanny calculated quickly. The sheep hadn't gone out when they all tried to distract Dewey, but that was because Nanny had misjudged how much time she'd need to open the gates. So then, it had been several days. Had all the rain swollen Fluff's door tight against the block? Fluff peered anxiously at Nanny through a crack. "It won't open?" she asked, her eyes so big you could see bands of white all the way under her pupils. "Not yet," said Nanny, determined not to show Fluff her own fear. "Let me give it another go from the other side." She came around, backed up, and hit the block with a mighty blow. Did the impact move it a little? It was hard to tell. She didn't think so. How could this be? Nanny tried again. Smash! And again. Her head rang now from the solid hits, but she wouldn't give up. Goats have a reputation for being stubborn. Well, she could be a goat in this respect too. Smash! She was going to get Fluff out. She was angry and scared, and there were tears in her eyes. How could they get this far and be defeated by one chunk of wood? One nail! Time was ticking down, and now the watchman cat seemed to detect a kind of doom. Under his fur, he felt the prickle of Dewey's imminent arrival. Quickly, Burdock turned and ran.